There are 1 trillion galaxies in the known universe. Superclusters, multiple galaxies, irregular galaxies, spiral galaxies, barred spiral galaxies, Seyfert galaxies, BL Lacerti objects. In the Milky Way, there are 200 billion stars, Cepheid variables, supergiants, main sequence stars, white dwarfs, neutron stars, pulsars, supernovae, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 88 constellations. However, outside the window was a sheet of darkness. I stared hopelessly at the gray computer screen, trying to construct a model of the universe in my mind. The priest kept chattering beside me. Spence had already given up and sneakily left the teaching program to open a game. But a small cluster of dark green electric sparks suddenly flashed between the priest's fingers, making him sit up straight. How many lashes had he taken today? I shook my head, bored, and glanced at the dark space on the screen. My attention wandered aimlessly. The priest's bronze mouth opened and closed in front of me, and I tried to grasp the meaning of the words, but they flowed past my ears like water. I knew I was powerless again today, so I lowered my head and sketched a nude woman on the desk. The priest suddenly extended a steel arm and knocked on my desk. "Away!" Andy yelled angrily. "What?" I was startled, quickly straightening up and covering the desk with my hand. The light from the cold overhead lamp spilled onto the steel giant, its red eyes flashing menacingly. "Answer the question, young man. Were you listening?" The priest stared at me closely. I racked my brain, but I wasn't good at deceiving a robot like the priest, who didn't even have a brain of his own. The priest followed Andy's commands directly, but that didn't mean he wasn't a threat to us. I didn't want to be whipped in public like Spence. Spence kept kicking my foot, writing something on his fluorescent board, but I couldn't see anything. "Sorry, I didn't hear your question." I mumbled softly, "I don't know." Auntie had the priest continue glaring at me. "Don't know what? Do you think this is a joke?" "Well, I got distracted just now." Glancing at the children around me staring, I had to admit. The priest stared at me for a while until I lowered my gaze. I heard him shake his head, his overused bearings letting out an unpleasant squeak. "Away. You really disappoint me. Remember, all the children are watching you." She added sternly, "Do not defy the educational program." With surprising agility, given his heavy appearance, the priest turned and asked the class, "So, who can tell me the answer?" The children were silent. Xiaoxiu hesitantly raised her hand. "Xiaoxiu," Annie said. "Exactly right." I fumed. Ever since she started teaching, Annie always compared me to her. I was really tired of it. "Exactly right," Auntie screeched in praise, while having the priest turn to glare at me. "Now, let's look at the densest celestial bodies." I'll turn the telescope toward the Taurus A direction. The computer screen clicked, automatically switching to the 1.5-meter telescope lens in the Zhulong observation room. The screen remained covered in that all-encompassing darkness. But Annie ignored it, continuing to yell, "Now what you're seeing is PSR 0531 plus 21, with a pulse period of 33 milliseconds. Someone muttered from the corner, and my heart skipped a beat. That girl was going to stir trouble again. Sure enough, Auntie turned all 20 phototube red eyes in the classroom toward the corner and stared suspiciously. "Jiaxiang, what did you just say?" She said softly but clearly. "I just said, why are we listening to this nonsense? Everyone knows there's nothing out there." "Oh," I groaned. That was too much. Though no one liked Auntie, no child had ever dared speak to her like that. I realized the classroom was dead silent. Xiaoxiu coldly turned her head, focusing on her screen. He had always been indifferent to others, I thought. Auntie seemed stunned for a moment by this unexpected rebellion, but she quickly gripped her whip viciously. "Do not defy the educational program. Do you want to break the rules?" I didn't dare turn around, but I was more focused on this struggle than anyone else, hoping she'd remember my words. "Don't speak, fool. Don't say anything." Jiaxiang didn't speak again, but she bit her lip and glared defiantly at the priest. I anticipated her rebellious fate and closed my eyes with a sigh. "Go to the detention room after class. No lunch. You need to reflect." Auntie's voice trembled with anger. She glanced at me and Spence and added furiously, "All 3 of you go." Another misfortune, I thought. I knew this would happen. The detention room was cramped and dark, with only a dim fluorescent light flickering annoyingly. Last time, it was just me and Jiaxiang, but this time, with Spence added, it wasn't as exciting. Spence was of Indian descent, maybe a Creek mix, or so Jiaxiang said. But the only thing evident was he was 3 years younger than me but bigger than anyone, so his appetite was also larger. He moaned, rubbing his stomach, "I'm starving." "I told you, don't make mistakes before eating, didn't I say that before?" I angrily kicked him. "Move over. Your elbow is poking my ribs." If it weren't for that cockroach, Jiaxiang wouldn't even bother talking to me. She was stubborn from birth. "Don't be stupid," I said later. "But there really is nothing out there." Jiaxiang turned, stroking the shiny chrome window frame on the metal wall, pressing her face against the cold, dark glass. "Do you really believe there are stars? Since I was born, it's been black outside, nothing visible, not even with Shulong. Annie tells us it's a sea of light, countless enormous fireballs, emitting unimaginable energy, millions of degrees hot. Light so bright it could blind you. Can you imagine that?" Stone told me. Spence interrupted. "The universe has already ended." He read it on a disc one day. "All stars will dim like candles and then go out, one by one. Darkness will rule until the end of the universe. Maybe now is the end of the world." "Don't listen to his nonsense," I said angrily. "Stone is crazy. He worships darkness, always secretly feeding his theories to kids who don't know better." "Am I one of those kids?" Spence asked, displeased. I closed my eyes, refusing to look at the tempting darkness outside. Memories flowed from long-forgotten corners. A long time ago, someone once told me we are flying through dark matter. I didn't understand him at the time, and I couldn't find more information from Annie either. But one source speculated that it doesn't emit electromagnetic radiation, so we can't detect it. Everything is unknowable. "Wait," Spence said. "I've seen the dark matter theory, but anti-categorized it in U-zone unreliable and unproven because apart from an extremely idealistic value guess about omega, there's no other evidence." "What's omega?" Jiaxiang asked. "Omega is the most sacred number in cosmology," I explained. "It's the ratio of the universe's density to the critical value, 3 hydrogen atoms per cubic yard. From a mathematical and aesthetic perspective, the universe is simplest and most beautiful when omega equals 1. In such a case, the aging universe could be reborn like a phoenix from the ashes, but for omega to equal 1, the universe would need large amounts of unobservable dark matter and hidden matter." Jiaxiang hesitated. "You mean if there's no dark matter, omega would be less than 1? What would happen to the universe then?" I sighed and looked up at the eternal darkness outside. If omega were less than 1, then the universe would be open, infinite, and eternal. It would keep expanding forever. The stars would burn out, and galaxies would move further and further apart, leaving a thin universe full of ashes. "A dark universe." "The universe Stone described," Spence said. "But I believe in him. He told me the universe must be simple and most beautiful. I must believe in his words." I clenched my fists. Spence asked skeptically, "Who is he?" "I don't remember anyone crazier than you on the ship." "Don't worry about who he is," I said irritably. "Of course, you've forgotten. You only know how to crawl through those black tubes every day or play with your dopamine." Spence flinched. "Why so harsh?" "Dark matter. Fine. Dark matter it is. I'll listen to you since you're the leader." I ignored him. "All right, silly girl, are we good now?" Jiaxiang is a fool, a girl hard to convince. She never easily believes in anything, always radiating an uncontrollable energy, which usually causes more trouble on this cramped ship. In this dead world, she stood out as uniquely charming, healthy, and graceful. Her teeth were white, sharp, and small, her waist slender. Even when she first entered the detention room, frowning angrily and glaring at me in silence, I found her captivating. "Don't be a fool," I advised her at the time. "Am I a fool? Then why did you say there's nothing out there?" She turned her head away, not wanting to talk to me. "Your pet has come out," Spence reported almost gleefully from the side. In the dim light, a cockroach was crawling arrogantly out of a rusty crack in the detention room. For some reason, seeing such oily, dirty creatures always freaked me out. Ever since the clumsy Eberhard knocked over the test tube full of cockroaches, the ship had been crawling with them. I let out a yell, jumped onto the table, and the dangling lamp started swaying. The chaotic shadows spun wildly around the narrow room as if the entire detention room was spinning. Stop making a scene. Josh-young finally couldn't hold back her laughter. She grabbed the unfortunate intruder barehanded and threw it into the recycling chute. Not angry anymore? I asked her. Why can't we just tell her she's wrong? Josh-young said. I sighed. It's useless, Josh-young. She doesn't even know what she's saying, and even Auntie isn't allowed to defy the educational program. She's a prisoner of it herself. She shouldn't punish us for telling the truth, Josh-young said. Fool, I mocked. She locked you up in the detention room. Auntie is never to be questioned. She's always right. Really? Josh-young tilted her head and looked at me. So last time we were locked up, was it really because you knocked over the test tube? Darn it. Eberhard knocked it over, I said. I was locked up because everything went wrong, and Auntie was mad. She's a responsible old lady who believes every mistake we make is her failure to properly discipline and guide us. We should have known earlier. Her constant nagging is just her way of coping with her own stress. Whether we listen or not doesn't matter. But someday, you'll have to tell her she's wrong to her face, Josh-young said. Why me? I groaned. Because you're the captain of this place, Josh-young said firmly. Back then, Josh-young still often attended astronomy classes with us, but she started showing up less and less. She was just a payload scientist and didn't need to take astronaut courses. Her specialty was biological research, and most of the time, she stayed in the greenhouse with her jars and plants. That was the largest space on the ship. This astonishing place was a fertile, rich, and incredible paradise. In reality, it was a spindle-shaped greenhouse, always brightly lit, filled with carbon crops, protein crops, and vitamin crops. It smelled of soil and sticky fertilizers. It was a strange world of plants, light, and shadows. We called it paradise because it was indeed beyond reach. The carbon dioxide levels inside reached 6%, which was beneficial for plants, but toxic to humans, a world we could not touch. 3 corridors converged there, and beneath them lay the dark, dead hull of the ship. Later on, Spence abandoned his hobby of crawling around the ship with spiders. He was granted access to the Zhulong, becoming the 5th person allowed into the ship's core area, so I barely had anyone to hang out with. During free time in the afternoons, I either indulged in sleep in my cabin or went to the greenhouse to cause trouble for Josh-young, or at least that's what she said. And she wasn't wrong. Josh-young's first detention was closely related to me. The first time I entered the embryo room next to Paradise, she shushed me. Be quiet, she said. I haven't said anything, I replied. Josh-young stood between 2 dissection lamps, wearing a white lab coat. Her hair shimmered in the light, as if being blown by a soft breeze. She was bent over the dissection table, looking like a forest sprite hovering over magical jars. On the other side of a steel and glass wall was the transparent world, bathed in silver, pale green, and deep green light. Curious, I leaned over and immediately let out a cry. Inside a test tube was a wriggling mass of dark, slimy arthropods. Their hundreds of oily, fluttering legs made me feel sick. Josh-young glanced at me with mild annoyance as she patiently used a vacuum pipette to transfer the disgusting creatures from a large test tube into small, ventilated glass petri dishes. What are these monsters? I asked in a low voice. American cockroaches, Josh-young answered. I'm helping Auntie transfer them into petri dishes. She adjusted the angle of the UV light, and under the beam, the cockroaches scurried even more frantically. You're making them nervous, Josh-young said. Why? I asked. I don't even want to touch them. It's their instinctive reaction: hunger, fear, disgust, things we can't imagine. Human motives are so complex that we can't understand the simplicity of insects. Josh-young smiled at me as if I were the representative of complicated humanity. Why do we even have these things on board? They're for my classes, Josh-young explained. I need them for some neurobiology dissections. Mammals require more air and food, but these little creatures have much lower needs. Since you're here, why don't you help me take these petri dishes to the incubator? I don't want to touch those creepy things. I clenched my fist and declared, sitting down to examine some of the more interesting-looking glass containers. 2 empty glass tubes had labels that read AAT-12, frozen embryo room. Embryos? I said, my mood inexplicably sinking. These insects were born like this too from test tubes? What's wrong? Josh-young asked. She must have found my expression amusing. These creatures, they're born to be tools for experiments. Your neurological reflex experiments with these bugs are pointless. I clenched my fists, an indescribable tremor like mercury flowing through my palms, making my thoughts waver, roaring through light, plants, Zhulong, and darkness. Because I shook my head to dispel the vision. The data from your experiments will all be wrong. They'll go mad in this environment. They'll pass down their insanity generation after generation, just like Annie passes down her madness to us. Careful with the rules. Annie can hear you in here, Josh-young said, looking at me with growing concern. Has Stone been filling your head with nonsense? You're acting strange today. Are you sick? Screw the rules. I wasn't usually like this, but that afternoon I felt irrefutable. Our destination is so far away that we're born on this broken ship, eating hydroponically grown winged beans, breathing recycled air, and flying with these slimy bugs, and I can't even complain? We have no future. Our journey has no purpose. None of this makes any sense. We're just being dissected one by one, like your American cockroaches, slowly analyzed by that old machine, to see which human race is best suited for space travel. I clenched my fists, warm mercury flooding my brain, and I didn't even notice I had grabbed the glass tube full of bugs and was waving it around. Away. Josh-young snapped to attention, angrily saying, dopamine will make you addicted. Spence shouldn't have given you that neural tremor device. It's only going to drive you into madness. Put the tube down, you're going to break it. The tremor device was the only thing Spence had successfully assembled. It could emit short microwave electron pulses using pressure, stimulating nerves to make the cerebral cortex produce dopamine, a natural stimulant. It altered your sense of balance, kind of like the feeling of weightlessness outside the ship, light and floaty. It was one of the few pleasures I could find aboard the ship. Don't worry, I haven't used the tremor device, I lied, sneaking the small box into my pocket. I may be out of it today, but I haven't touched dopamine. I feel fine, I said. That day, I felt fine until Eberhard broke the large test tube full of cockroaches. What happened? Eberhard asked nervously. The moment he appeared at the door of the embryo room, I knew my pleasant afternoon was about to be ruined. This slow, chubby payload electronics expert was a master at spoiling the mood. Eberhard was one of the smartest people on the ship, getting excellent grades in almost every subject. Whether it was Pritchard's economics introduction or Hammurabi's legal codes, he could remember everything word for word. He could even calculate the product of the cube of a wave function with his eyes closed. Undoubtedly, he was a genius. His fundamental flaw might be that he couldn't distinguish between what he learned and real life. He was always upholding a non-existent order on the ship, constantly thinking about reconciling the constant conflicts with Auntie's authority and the rules. No one on the ship liked Auntie, and consequently, no one liked him. He turned himself into a highly unlikable, solitary figure. In short, he was a fool. The moment he saw the glass tube I was holding, his voice changed with shock. Captain, you shouldn't be here, he said seriously. If everyone just casually wandered into others' workspaces, the ship would be in chaos. He frowned and sighed. Besides, Auntie can see everything here. Don't you understand? She knows everything. You'll get punished again, locked in the detention room or made to do cleaning. You're setting a bad example for the kids. Cut it out, Eberhard. The monitor by the door has been broken for nearly a day. The old lady doesn't know a thing. I snapped, realizing I was still holding the tube. Disgusted, I quickly tossed it onto the table, letting it wobble dangerously near the edge. Broken? Eberhard exclaimed in horror. Nearly a day? They should have reported it immediately. The repair bots could have fixed it in no time. I don't understand why no one wants to take responsibility anymore. We only have this one ship, and it might still be on a dangerous course for a long time, Eberhard said painfully. If we, the crew, don't care about it, then who will? One day, it'll sink like the Titanic. Enough, Eberhard, I said angrily. Last time, you said we'd blow up like some other ship or vanish like some other thing. Stop reading those disaster novels. They're doing you no good. Eberhard hesitated for a moment and then cautiously asked, I want to ask, do you know why the monitor stopped working? Could it be dangerous? Yes, I said. Spence removed the voltage regulator. Eberhard's face turned pale. He did what? He frowned. That's against the rules. He shouldn't have done that. If he already did. He looked at me with extreme distress, Captain. Should we report this to Auntie? I turned and stared at him in disbelief. Eberhard's face was pure and honest. He would never do anything Auntie didn't approve of. If anyone on the ship broke the moral code that sustained our survival, he would suffer as if it were a personal attack. If he weren't such a fool, his integrity would be admirable. If you dare tell anyone a word, I'll throw you into the garbage chute and send you into space. I said, Who's the captain here, you or me? Eberhard shivered and backed down. Listen, do you want to help me take this to the incubator or not? Jiaxiang said, Can you not leave it on the edge of the table? I wouldn't touch that thing for the world, I said, disgusted. I'll do it, Eberhard volunteered. Is this dangerous? He asked cautiously, reaching out his short, thick fingers to grab the tube, as if handling nitroglycerin. If I had any fault in this situation, it was that I shouldn't have maliciously poked him with my thumb the moment he touched the tube. Eberhard reacted as if he had been shot, jumping up with a rapid reflex he probably wasn't even aware of. He flung the tube full of bugs across the room. It shattered into countless pieces in the corner behind the dissection table. A few cockroaches, stunned by Eberhard's inhumane action, stumbled around in the broken glass, but most seized the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, unfurling their small, oily wings, and scattered. Jiaxiang screamed and rushed to hit the electromagnetic door switch. Before the door could fully close, a few brave cockroaches dashed out like the Argo passing through the Dardanelles, escaping into the world beyond. Eberhard screamed wildly, making me think he was being eaten by the cockroaches. To be honest, I was scared out of my wits too. I had never had so many disgusting creatures swarm at me before. Jiaxiang brushed a few cockroaches off her face and fumbled to open a spray bottle. A stream of biological anesthetic hit me in the face, finally calming the rebellious cockroaches. Regaining my composure, I turned and glared at Eberhard. Great job, you arrogant, idiotic fat tub. Now the cockroaches are free. Are you happy? Eberhard was flustered. I just wanted to help, he said. He always tried to help people, I thought angrily. Is it dangerous? Will it be okay? He always asked nervously, and nothing was ever okay when he was around. Now you're in big trouble, I said with malicious glee. Look at what you've done. You smashed the tube. Auntie will lock you up. Away, don't treat Eberhard like that. You're part of this too, Jiaxiang said angrily. Kids outside the room started screaming Auntie had surely noticed something was wrong. The sound of the priest's angry footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. Eberhard's face turned deathly pale. Oh no, he whimpered. Auntie won't punish me, will she? I've never made a mistake. The footsteps stopped at the door. He's here to get you, I said almost gleefully. The electromagnetic door slammed open, and the stern-faced priest stormed into the room. He marched across the embryo room, grabbed me and Jiaxiang, and locked us in the detention room. I knew arguing was pointless, so I just silently cursed the crazy kid who had dismantled the monitor. It was the first time I found myself in a chaotic situation without being the one causing trouble, yet Auntie still locked me up. If Jiaxiang hadn't been with me, I would have been furious. All this over 3 cockroaches, I shouted angrily. Locking us up is unfair. I just hope Auntie doesn't realize the magnitude of the mess we made, Jiaxiang retorted. Do you know how fast cockroaches breed? In 3 weeks, one escaped female could have a first batch of 40 baby cockroaches. If nothing stops them, in 2 years, there could be 40 million descendants. Impossible, I said. You're just trying to scare me. You know what will happen? 2 male cockroaches will fight over the female, and both end up killing each other. That poor female will live alone, and then die cleanly. I patted my clothes smugly. As if awakened by the motion, a small cockroach crawled out of my coverall pocket, wiggled its antennae, and darted through the door crack, joining the free world. I stared at its escape, speechless. Jiaxiang cheerfully added, Now there are 4 cockroaches. Children fresh out of the nursery see the spaceship as a giant maze made up of countless thresholds, identical corridors, and dizzying ladders. Time quickly teaches us this is a ridiculous illusion. Its inner chamber is 800 meters long, 60 meters wide, and spans 5 levels, a stifling, cramped cave where every crack is under anti-surveillance, except perhaps for the lower deck. The lower deck is the oldest part of the ship. It's a world entirely different from the upper decks where we live now. Down there lies the massive, oversized engine and the oldest crew quarters. Whether the planet that built it has been destroyed or not, all the wisdom and culture they left behind extends through this cold, mechanical ship. Every small weld and screw reflects the thinking and attitudes of our ancestors toward the universe. Perhaps this is why Spence is so obsessed with all the ship's mechanics. In the center of each level is a massive atrium. Standing at the bottom and looking up, you can see the softly glowing Zhulong far above, with its narrow, dizzying spiral staircase leading to its small entrance. It makes you think of the oculus at the top of the Pantheon's dome that Auntie mentioned during our art history classes. Rome's connection between the world of gods and men. Zhulong is the link between the children and Auntie, where her most sacred brain resides, and only those who have passed the coming-of-age ceremony are allowed inside. It's almost an honor. Normally, Auntie never communicates with anyone directly, relying instead on the priests and spiders, her various forms walking silently through the dark corridors, maintaining order and function in this enormous world. Undeniably, the ship is slowly dying. Its parts are wearing down and decaying. Its once shiny metal exterior is rusting, rotting. The vast storage areas are gradually being depleted of unrecyclable materials. Auntie has been forced to close several sections not essential to survival, redirecting all available resources to Zhulong, the scout ship, the engine room, all the most critical areas. She believes the engine zone would function better without interference from children, so she shut down the lower deck as well. After the lower deck was closed, no one was allowed to enter, so it no longer needed control, lighting, ventilation, or surveillance. Auntie didn't foresee that it would become a favored playground for adventurous children looking to do something foolish. I've only been down there once since it was sealed. Darkness and death wrapped tightly around me like a shroud, filled with imagined fears, dust, rusted pulley tracks, discarded parts. But beneath those initial feelings, it seemed to contain something we'd been missing all along. Our ancestors once lived in that cabin, grew old, and died there. It left behind years of history and legend. Walking through the dark, seemingly boundless space of the lower deck, I felt the power of centuries stretching across time. Those ancient people left everything to their descendants, who would learn and grow under the guidance of computers, never knowing what kind of universe the ship would reach or what kind of people those children would become. They and their world had vanished forever. Yet the children say their spirits still watch over us. There's also an abandoned play area down there. If you brush away the thick rust, you can still make out the horses, slides, and 2-person swings. Only the older kids used to play there. Me and Xioshu. But Xioshu is dead now. I couldn't help thinking of him. Does his soul wander here, or in the dark, unknowable space where he died? When he died, the surrounding darkness was as thick as stagnant fog. In the lower deck's darkness, his white figure seemed to flicker before my eyes. By the time I fled the lower deck, I was terrified. I had forgotten all the heavy thoughts the place had stirred in me and swore never to set foot there again. Perhaps only Spence was truly unaffected by the eerie atmosphere. During that infamous wandering behind the spiders that infuriated Auntie, Spence even found a shiny glass hexagon in the lower deck. When you flipped the hexagon over, tiny, sparkling pigments would form interesting animated scenes inside depictions of a wintry forest on Earth. The snow-covered woodland was desolate, but gradually, you'd see vultures circling overhead, a musk deer standing against the wind, exhaling white mist, a few finches huddling together in the trees for warmth, and a black bear hibernating in a hollow tree stump, its heart beating only 10 times per minute. Oddly, despite the beautiful scenes, the hexagon was inscribed with the word death in crooked letters, as if the engraver had exhausted all their strength. The person who carved it must have been a nutcase like Stone, Spence said. Death, Stone said in the dining room. All living things must die to face final judgment. Listen, Stone, I said angrily. If you don't stop spreading this stuff to the kids, I'll report you to Annie. You won't report me, he said menacingly, seeing through my bluff. Then he turned and walked away, radiating an unsettling intensity. Stone was always fanatical about his beliefs. Ever since he found some religious texts in storage, he had poured all his passion into these gods and rituals. I don't know how many people had been swayed by the subversive prophecies he spread behind Annie's back. Even Spence sometimes showed suspicious tendencies. Why don't you report him? Spence asked. I'm not using Auntie to take down another heretic. I replied irritably. Did I mention Spence was a big guy, but he looked quite gentle? If you saw him walking with his hands in his pockets and his head down, you'd think he was some quiet, harmless fellow. But in a blink, you'd find him crouched somewhere, enthusiastically prying open an electromagnetic lock or tinkering with some mechanical device. His pockets were always stuffed with wires, thin metal sheets, and little parts he dismantled from who knows where. To be fair, the guy was a lousy mechanic. Almost everything he touched ended up disassembled and never put back together. For a while, he developed a sudden interest in the ship's structure, skipping his classes to follow spiders all over the ship. He roamed every dark corner, finding that glass hexagon in the abandoned lower deck with its ancient, cryptic inscription. He got shocked countless times in front of Zhulong's blackened brass door. Those days were a nightmare for the spiders, and Auntie nearly deployed all the backup spiders to clean up after Spence's messes. No one would have believed that Spence would suddenly abandon his mechanical obsession and his spider friends to throw all his energy into his physics studies, but it happened. I resolved never to trust someone like him again. Spence had long passed his 14-year-old coming-of-age ceremony, but he had a habit of making small mistakes before being granted access to Zhulong, leading Auntie to revoke his privileges repeatedly. So, Spence, despite being a year older than Eberhard, was the fifth crew member to step into Zhulong. The four before him were me, Stone, Eberhard, and the first child born when the ship awoke from its long sleep. Standing on the stairway landing, Spence was grinning widely, his teeth showing. After wandering the ship countless times trying to sneak into Zhulong's observation hall, the doors finally opened for him. Though a genius at disassembling things, he had never managed to unlock Zhulong's door. It had a DNA molecular detection system installed, allowing entry only after the embryo's DNA formula had matured for 14 years. Any unauthorized intruders would be struck down by high-voltage shocks. Spence must have been impressed by that. "Welcome, kid," I said, sitting in a comfortable chair on the observation platform. If not for Spence, I wouldn't have liked coming to this place. At that moment, Spence didn't respond to my greeting. I realized the new member was standing there like a fool, mouth wide open, staring at the observation hall entrance. "Aren't you curious about the ship?" I asked. "Wandering through those dark corridors is a waste of time. The ship's essence is right here." Anyone entering the observation hall for the first time reacts like Spence. The place resembles a small, elegant, domed theater, surrounded by a spherical wall that seems made of giant crystals. Specially designed wall lights dimly illuminated the lower half of the hall, and the smooth metal floor reflected a dark red glow. Half of the round wall was lined with glowing compartments, each containing a delicate memory crystal. Tiny sparks flickered and danced within them. This was the sacred repository of the ship's most precious cargo. The entire knowledge of human civilization was stored here. You could say this was Annie's brain. The other half of the circular wall, even more imposing, held Spence's attention. It was entirely transparent. A terrifying, black abyss lay exposed before everyone. Beneath the shadowy dome lay Zhulong's massive, octopus-like aluminum steel body, its smooth, cold, golden surface dimly illuminated by a faint red glow. "Don't touch that," I warned him. "It's one of Auntie's most precise instruments, and we depend on it to find our destination if there is one. If you dare remove a single screw from Zhulong, you're dead. Listen, if you can't control yourself, don't come here at all." "We don't care about you," Stone said coldly from the side. The other older kids in the observation hall said nothing. They stared at Spence coldly. They didn't like him. Sadly, I realized that none of us on this ship liked each other much. At that moment, I didn't know that I would soon come to despise Spence as well. From the moment he stepped through the glowing metal doors of the observation hall, Spence was no longer the mechanical geek we knew. His deeply buried genetic code took hold, revealing his true nature. He was born to be an excellent astrophysicist. From that day on, he poured himself into Zhulong's physical observations and research with unusual passion, abandoning both mechanics and me, his former friend. A faint and barely perceptible tremor was getting closer and more frequent, enveloping me with a sense of unease. The scout ship approached again, and the mothership was reacting to its gravitational pull. Every 6 months, the scout ship returned for maintenance, which was also the day for astronauts to go outside. I dreaded going out. For a long time, I had been filled with fear and loathing for the dark space outside. During my first extravehicular mission, I was terrified. Outside the airlock, there was no light. Every beam from the ship's windows seemed choked to death by the darkness, and Xioshu kept moaning in my ear. Ever since then, I had desperately tried to avoid going outside. But this time, it seemed inevitable. Auntie decided that 3 children must take their first extravehicular training under my guidance. As I've said before, Auntie is not to be contradicted. The airlock was on the lower deck, not the one where Xioshu had died. The first airlock had been sealed off, but I still felt uneasy. I was forced into a thick, heavy spacesuit, crammed into the small airlock with the 3 kids. The metallic air inside made me feel sick. Just thinking about the black abyss outside made me more and more afraid. Eventually, I stood there, starting to resent the children. If it weren't for these kids who always needed care, I wouldn't have to be here, facing the cold darkness and my past. I looked up to glare at the kids in the airlock, but suddenly shivered Xioshu was among them. He looked exactly like the captain who had died. The hatch clicked shut, and a flood of painful memories rushed over me, suffocating. I was sweating. This ominous coincidence was terrifying. He didn't look at me. From birth, he had been just as confident and determined as the original captain. His grades were always better than mine. He didn't need my guidance at all. The other 2 kids were nervously staring at me, as if unsure of what to do. I turned to them, irritated, and said, "Manual. Check your manuals. Double-check your safety lines and buckle them." The 2 kids just stared blankly at me, as if they hadn't heard. One opened his mouth but said nothing. Angrily, I repeated, "Hey, what's wrong?" I said check your safety lines. The other kid moved his lips too, but no sound came out. I felt an increasing terror, shouting into the radio, "What's going on? Why aren't you speaking?" No one responded. Xioshu had a strange expression on his face, as if his gaze passed right through me. Panicking, I looked around but saw nothing. My fear spread to the kids. They stared wide-eyed, moving their mouths silently, but I couldn't hear anything. Something was wrong. A terrifying sense of isolation gripped me. I felt cold all over, and the radio was dead silent. It felt like I had been abandoned by everyone. No one could hear me. They wouldn't notice my presence. They would leave me here, alone in this terrible place. Answer me. Answer me. I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything at all. I screamed in agony, unable to control myself, kicking the hatch wildly. The kids were terrified. One of them started hiccuping, eyes rolling in fear. But I still couldn't hear anything. I ignored the panicking kids, hysterically pounding the hatch with my fists. "Open the door. Open the door." I screamed at the monitor. For a moment, it felt like I was back 8 years ago when the accident happened, with the hatch standing still just like this. "Let me out," I shouted, knowing no one could hear me, and I couldn't stop crying. Annie let me out. She was furious, both because the spacesuit's communication system had malfunctioned and because of my poor performance. The radio had been tampered with, which made Eberhard anxious. Later, he came to me and said, "You should ask Spence if he messed with the radio again. It's dangerous. He'll tell you the truth." Of course, I tampered with it. Spence told me, glaring. "You told me to, didn't you? Last week, you said you didn't want to go out and asked me to come up with something, right?" I had forgotten about that. Later, I didn't tell Eberhard anything. When I came out of the airlock, for some reason, I wanted to see Jiaxiang. Outside the airlock, Auntie kept nagging, and the busy spiders and rescue bots buzzed with irritating noises, swirling around me like a vortex. Amid the chaos I had caused, I felt utterly exhausted. Xioshu had come up to me, and the contempt in his eyes made me feel ashamed. I knew no one respected me as the captain. Even Spence probably saw me as nothing more than an unreliable companion. Everything on the ship seemed meaningless, except for that little girl. Maybe she was the only one who truly understood me. I hadn't seen Jiaxiang in a long time. Suddenly, I had an overwhelming desire to be alone with her, even if it meant breaking my vow and going back down to the lower deck. Curled up behind the cooling pipes, I could see the light filtering down from the upper deck. The massive machines lining the corridor tilted at strange, surreal angles, casting shadows on the walls that stirred my imagination. I started to regret my decision, and a small shadow slipped in. "Jiaxiang? It's me," she said. I touched a long, soft hand as she groped her way to sit beside me. "Is the kid okay?" I asked, feeling a little guilty. "He's fine, just a little too nervous." Auntie gave him a sedative. She hesitated for a moment and then said, "The real issue is you, away." I weakly smiled. "You saw everything today. It was terrible, wasn't it? I used to think I was doing pretty well before. You lost control of your emotions. Even if you're scared, you shouldn't show it. Away, you're the captain. Don't be silly. Why do you all keep calling me the captain?" "I'm not." I shouted angrily. "I'm nothing. If it weren't for that accident," I choked, "I wouldn't even be the captain. No one knows that I've been scared all along. I'm scared of being the captain. I'm scared of going outside. I'm scared of the dark. Even here in the lower deck, I'm afraid." "I know," Jiaxiang said sympathetically. "You're afraid. But there's nothing shameful about that. Away, we all have our fears. Everyone faces their own darkness at some point. The question is, when will you step out of yours? Captain, don't you believe in yourself? We're all products of genetic engineering, the best of the best. You can be a good captain." "Nonsense, I can't. Everyone on the ship knows I'm the biggest fool here. I can't be the captain." I snapped angrily, refuting her. "You weren't always afraid of the dark. You don't avoid learning because you dislike your field. Your genome was designed to make you a brave astronaut, but you keep rejecting it." Jiaxiang leaned close to me in the dark. "Why, Away? What are you avoiding? Think about it. Why are you so angry?" "Because you know I'm right." I closed my eyes, my face pale. The darkness wrapped tightly around me like a shroud. I tried to remember, but only a vague sense of dread loomed over me. A white shadow flickered across my mind. "I don't know," I yelled in frustration. "I don't want to know." Jiaxiang pressed on. "What about Xioshu?" "What?" I raised my head sharply. "Xioshu. Why are you afraid of him? You were acting strange when he was in the airlock today." I forced a smile. "Ridiculous. He's just a kid. Why would I be afraid of him?" Jiaxiang silently looked at me, saying nothing. I lowered my head, clenching my teeth. A chill ran up my spine. I saw the white figure again, the pale, blood-stained face. It was Xioshu's face, the other Xioshu's face. He was the true captain of the ship. Later, Auntie urgently initiated the astronaut reserve and brought forth a new captain. Little Xioshu had just turned 8 this year and was already displaying extraordinary leadership and talent, just like the original Xioshu. Every child knew that once little Xioshu turned 14, he would undoubtedly become the captain. Since the day little Xioshu was born, I had avoided him, never speaking kindly when we crossed paths. The other children pretended not to notice. Life on the ship had long taught us to ignore each other. Maybe only sensitive Jiaxiang knew what I was running from. "Tell me about your nightmares, Away," Jiaxiang whispered in my ear. "I'll bear them with you." "No one remembers anything," I said. "I was only 8 that year." The headset crackled with alarms, and the surrounding darkness was so thick it felt like I could stir it with my hands. Xioshu and I were like helpless drowning victims in a vast, endless black tide, and the darn airlock door on the ship wouldn't open. Xioshu's face flickered behind his helmet, each passing second stealing his life away. That day was the first time I was allowed to walk outside the ship, and at first, everything seemed fascinating. Outside was a black world. and the ship's external searchlights could only cast a faint, blurry shadow on the deck. The gravity generator's effect was weaker outside, and I felt as if I was floating lightly. But the novelty of the microgravity quickly faded, and I became dizzy, with my insides churning. The one who took me outside was Xiushu. At that time, he was the only older kid on the ship allowed into Zhulong. We rarely saw him because he was always absorbed in whatever he was doing inside Zhulong. We tended to avoid him. He was pale, tall, and awkward-looking, but we respected him. He was incredibly smart, eccentric, and always talking to himself, which made us admire him. Sometimes Xiushu seemed indifferent to us, and other times he was strict. In my memory, he was always shouting at me, seeing me as a clueless kid. But that day, he was decent to me. Outside, he showed me the different ways to perform extravehicular maintenance, and we worked together to dismantle an old VHF antenna at the bow. "Careful, kid," he shouted. "Get your clumsy wrench out of the way." He bent down, and I could feel the tension in his muscles beneath the thick spacesuit. This kind of work could have been done by spiders, but Annie insisted that every astronaut learn the skill themselves. It was part of the education program. While dismantling the antenna, I saw a hazy glow in front of the ship. "Didn't you pay attention in class? That's the scout ship, acting as the ship's shield," Xiushu said. "It comes back once a month. Normally, we can't see it. Is that because it's so dark here?" "Dark?" He laughed loudly. "Can darkness blind not just our eyes but our hearts?" I didn't quite understand what he meant, so I stayed silent. After a while, I timidly said, "I don't understand Annie's lessons sometimes. What she says and I couldn't find the words, blushing as I waved my hand toward the black space, and these don't match. "Kid, don't go accusing Auntie to her face." Xiushu dropped his wrench. I wasn't sure if he was angry again. "It's fine if you don't understand. It's all lies up there." He was silent for a long time, as if his thoughts had drifted elsewhere. Finally, he said, "All right, kid. I'm going to tell you something, whether you get it or not." Look in the small area illuminated by the faint searchlights. It was a gray, lifeless world. Occasionally, faint sparks flickered on some of the external instruments. Aside from that, the contrast between shadow and light was stark, like a black and white silhouette. The pale ship's body stretched beneath our feet like a giant, dead fish. Gray-black streaks were everywhere, evidence of its long wandering through this endless space. And beyond it, there was nothing but darkness. "We're here," he said, his pale face glowing, looking at these mummies. "Can you imagine a world where people once breathed? We left the land to uncover its secrets. It lies there, smooth and black as silk, gleaming temptingly. But one day, we found that it was boundless. Nothing is more terrifying or beautiful than the infinite. Do you think this place is beautiful? A dark, hopeless heck. But we were created to think and grieve here. Isn't that a miracle?" He looked at me intently, and I could see the small blue veins pulsing on his forehead. "Do you believe in dark matter? Do you believe, no matter how terrible the world is, that the universe is the most beautiful thing? Otherwise, our lives would be meaningless. Do you believe that?" He looked frightening, and I knew he wanted a definite answer from me. But I timidly said, "I don't know. That's useless." He swung the wrench, smashing the antenna support with a crazed intensity, shouting things I couldn't understand. "Then what about me? Do I believe or not? Can it be proven or disproven? What is truth? I'm looking for it." He stopped. "I'm about to find it, about to discover it." He gave a blank, foolish smile, staring into the distant, hazy darkness. At that time, Stone was still babbling as a toddler. I couldn't be sure if he remembered any of this. Later that night, in the bomb-filled lower deck, Stone was the first to break the silence. "Of course, I remember him," he said. "He wasn't a good leader. He should have guided us kids and sought the way forward together, not alone. Didn't you notice he'd already gone mad?" He said mockingly. "He lost his way." Yes, he was a bit mad. I was afraid to admit I was thinking the same. So I quickly countered, "We have to respect him because he was the first child on the ship. He had to face the vast, crazy space all alone. He didn't need to stoop to us clueless kids' level. So he died, Stone concluded, and we'll all die too, to face judgment. Darn your judgment, I retorted angrily. I was too young back then, or he wouldn't have died. I really was too young then, too young to do anything but ask questions. What does the scout ship do ahead of us? I asked, unable to suppress my curiosity despite the fear. Shoshu seemed to realize again that I was still beside him. He turned and gave me a strange look before smirking. What does it do? He tossed aside a small piece of the dismantled antenna, which floated away slowly, leaving the ship's orbit. Hey, watch. Without the scout ship, we'd. A blinding spark suddenly burned into my eyes. Go boom, Shoshu said with a smile. It's because we're flying at 30,000 kilometers per second, and the universe is filled with charged particles. At that speed, hitting them is like hitting a bomb. The scout ship is our Moses. It parts the Red Sea and leads us forward. With a childlike sense of wonder, I watched the launch racks at the bow slowly open. They're about to launch Scout Ship 2. They're made of specially reinforced materials, but they still need regular maintenance. Shoshu said, we have to help with that. It's part of the program. The glowing mist drew closer. The entire ship began to tremble lightly. The previous Scout ship's engines were firing at full thrust as it decelerated, sliding along the auxiliary track toward the bow. It would stay there for a month for a complete overhaul before its next launch. Shoshu seemed a little nervous. The scout ship was battered and scarred, with one of its attitude control fins hanging limply. It looks like it's been through a rough battle. This is dangerous. We should head back. But the program. Screw the program. Don't tell me what to do, Shoshu shouted. I'm always right. The scout ship came closer, slamming into the bow's guide rails. The ship's magnetic clamps struggled to hold it in place. There's no time, kid. Secure your safety line, Shoshu shouted at me. I stared in terror as the monstrous steel beast tore into the mothership. The deck beneath my feet shook violently. A massive chunk of the scout ship's hull broke loose and silently hurtled toward me, its razor-sharp edge clear in my vision. I was frozen with fear. Shoshu let go of his safety line and leaped to tackle me to the ground. But the recoil sent him flying into the jagged debris. His white figure flashed before me, slamming hard into the bow deck, then rebounding and landing on top of me. I saw his pale face, blood gushing from his mouth and nose. Get me back inside, kid, he gasped. My oxygen systems busted. Oxygen was rushing out of the breach in Shoshu's spacesuit. How long can an astronaut last without oxygen? 14 seconds? 16? I couldn't remember. Outside the airlock, I fumbled helplessly, unable to open it. Shoshu gave me a tired smile through his visor. I'm not gonna make it. Away. It was the first time he called me by name. Take care of the kids. A black mist clouded his eyes, and all I could do was cry out loud. The outer valve of the airlock crept open, a slow century passing in those few moments. Through the inner valve, I could see all the spiders frantically scurrying around the hatch. Air finally rushed in, but Shoshu was already dead. In those 10 seconds outside the airlock, death and darkness had never felt so close. Many children had died on the ship. We had witnessed death more than once. Once, during a plague that swept through the ship after the embryos were thawed, we heard news of a child's death every few days. Everyone was quarantined in their tiny cabins, waiting for either the medical robots or the Grim Reaper to knock on their doors. Even then, I had never come so close to seeing death's face. In that accident, the one who should have died was a clueless little kid. It should have been me. You're blaming yourself away, Joshyoung said softly, but it wasn't your fault. It was Shoshu's choice. We can't take responsibility for other people's choices. I later realized that Shoshu yelled at me because he wanted me to be like him, a great astronaut. But that day, I was scared out of my mind. I glanced at my hands, trembling uncontrollably. I clenched them tightly and shouted, "Darn it, I'll never make it. I'll never be a good crew member." Spence suddenly came running to me. His saliva was flying, and he was extremely excited. The veins in his thin neck were throbbing violently. "I have made a great discovery. Boss, it's unbelievable. I think we need to call an emergency meeting." "Emergency meeting? Are you crazy? Auntie won't approve of you doing this," I said angrily. This is an illegal assembly. I've thought of it a long time ago. Spence smiled mysteriously. We can go to the Zhulong Observatory, where your aunt won't know anything. I guarantee you'll be surprised. Wait a minute, I said doubtfully. There used to be a surveillance camera there too. Not now, Spence said impatiently. Come on, Eberhard and Stone are waiting there. Are you going or not? Eberhard? Stone? I glanced at Spence suspiciously. There was no way they could be included in Spence's joke. Maybe Spence had really discovered something? I got out of bed. If Spence just wanted to scare me, the effect was really amazing. He turned off all the lights in the Candle Dragon room, leaving only the dark red wall lamp on. It was dark inside, and I had to step carefully across the floor full of scattered instruments and papers, looking around with a confused expression. On the wall, there were large close-up slides of celestial bodies that Spence had found from somewhere. I recognized the famous Crab Nebula, whose red dust clouds extended outward, making them look like palms stripped of blood vessels and nerves. A dark nebula that I couldn't name, which looked like a foot hanging in the air. The photos of the stars reflected strange lights under the red wall lamp, as if they were shaking. Stone and Eberhard were also in there, and their expressions looked very uncomfortable. Only Spence had a smile on his silly head that was always smug. I stared at the place in amazement and said angrily, My God, Spence, why did you make this place so dark? Do you know what your aunt will do to you if she finds out that you have ruined this place like this? I don't have time to think about that. Spongs pulled me to the computer table with a smug look on his face. Come and see. His fingers moved skillfully on the screen. A red line flowed out from the shadows and crossed the screen diagonally. I found the external scanning data of Zhulong 7 years ago. You won't believe it. It was retrieved from the earliest archives. Remember the dark matter theory you mentioned in the confinement room? The man you mentioned is really an amazing guy. We don't have any data on dark matter at all. It seems that it is invisible and intangible, but he believes that the density of dark matter clouds should be traceable by feedback of interstellar hydrogen frequency. He calculated the dark matter density data by himself and left the density conversion formula in the computer. Before I could react, he opened another window on the screen. I have rescanned the outside of the cabin in the past 2 months. This is the data table that Zhulong typed out. Another red line appeared in the window, and its ripple curvature was very similar to the previous one. Perhaps they could overlap, but Spence didn't stack them on top of each other. He just laid them side by side, one on top of the other. Now, he looked at me eagerly. Do you see the problem? Are you having a fever? There are 3,000 data here. What can I see? I said angrily. Never mind the data, Spence shouted, grabbing me by the collar. These curves show that the density is decreasing. Dark matter. We are about to discover the secret of the universe. Impossible, I said. You'll find nothing but that you're in solitary confinement again. Dark matter? What dark matter? Sherdong asked vigilantly. It's in the U-zone memory, and it's a story that's not very clear, Spence said. In order to explain some phenomena, scientists on ancient Earth helplessly realized that there might be an invisible gravitational force under the hazy film of the visible universe, and science couldn't come up with its material form or energy form. Some people even proposed that it might be the basis of the existence of galaxies. It is this unexplored large amount of dark matter that causes the curvature of space-time. And if there is enough dark matter, the cosmological constant omega will be equal to 1, a perfect number. TSK. Omega? Sherdong sneered. Are you kidding? Your evidence is just omega. I never believe in intuition. Eberhard, what do you think? Spence turned around and asked Eberhard enthusiastically. What? Eberhard responded quickly. He was really panicked that Spence actually spoke to him. I don't know. Maybe Annie can. I see. This is a conspiracy, Stone said fiercely. So this time you want to completely refute my religious theory. You have arranged in advance. No, wait. It's not what you think. There's nothing, Spence said angrily, and he flipped through the charts on the screen quickly. You can check the data yourself. I always want to stay away from these theoretical disputes. Can you turn off these slides? I feel uncomfortable. I said. I don't feel uncomfortable, just ignore it. Spence seemed not to notice what I said at all. He pounced on the table and took out a film from what I thought was a pile of waste paper. Okay, you will believe it. This optical film was taken by Zhulong during ultraviolet scanning. Nonsense. I interrupted Spence. Zhulong can't shoot any optical film at all. It is directly connected to my aunt's monitor. Dong said coldly, unless someone has touched Zhulong. One by one, we turned our heads toward Spence. Spence said with a clear and innocent expression, "Why? Don't you want to know the truth? This is your only chance." I stared angrily at the film that Spence had risked his unforgivable crime to shoot, and there was nothing on it except a small grade, an inconspicuous grade. "What is this, a blemish on your film?" I asked doubtfully. "My God, don't you understand?" Spence shook my arm frantically. He turned back to look at everyone. "Don't you understand? This is a star. We can't see it with the naked eye, but we are flying towards it. We are about to fly out of the dark matter cloud." Stars. I was frightened by Spence's words, and a cold sweat broke out from my palms. I looked back at Eberhard, who was also pale. "No, that's not a star." A sharp voice broke the silence. It was Dong. His face turned blue, and his voice trembled. "That's not a star. Haven't you read the book of Revelation? He is like lightning that breaks through the dark clouds, bringing death and illuminating everything. He will appear. Woe to you who don't believe in God." A beam of light shone on Dong's face, making his narrow face look blue and white. Stone was a big man with long arms and legs, skinny and bony, only 1 year younger than me. He was probably the person who looked down on me the most on the spacecraft, and I never believed his inflammatory predictions. But what he said at this time was like a throbbing shock that hit my heart. "Can you see?" Spence asked. "There's something wrong with him." Eberhard and I were silent. Stone sneered and said, "Think about it yourself. Each of us belongs to a different ethnic group. Creeks, Mongols, Aryans, and this broken ship is full of all ethnic groups. Why? Think about the legend of Noah's Ark. We will float to the day of judgment." "Stars? No, it's the gray horse we are waiting for." He bit his fingernails nervously, left a cryptic and disturbing prophecy, and turned around and walked out. "You know what I think? Quantum physics is getting too close to God. He's getting deeper and deeper into the realm of the unknown," Spence said angrily. "One day, this guy is going to go crazy." "What about my aunt? Does she know about this?" I managed to squeeze out a sentence from my dry throat. "She never admitted that we were in a dark matter cloud." "Yes, I'll tell her right now." Spence shouted and rushed out the door. I grabbed his collar and pulled him back. "Don't worry, let me figure it out first." I asked him hoarsely, "How long will it take?" "I don't know. We don't have any comparative data. Maybe it will be 10 years. Maybe it will be tomorrow," Spence said. "What will it be like after we get out? Will it be like this?" I pulled down a picture from the wall. The huge Orion Nebula on it looked like a burning inferno, and Medusa's snake hair stretched out fiercely, occupying the entire field of vision. There. I swallowed and couldn't speak. I looked at Eberhard. He was as pale and terrified as I was. The words that Stone said before he left were like a huge shadow hanging over our hearts. Eberhard opened his mouth pitifully and said hesitantly, Stone is referring to Zhulong and Auntie. Are we worshipping the beast? I don't know. That's not my business. Spence said. He stood in the center of the observation room and looked at us strangely. What's the matter? Aren't you all happy? For more than 10 years, all we have learned is to describe that universe. Now, we are going to see it with our own eyes. You don't believe what Stone said, do you? I muttered. I'm not ready yet. This is too fast, Spence. Let me think about what to do. Spence, I said, looking back into his eyes, I forbid you to tell anyone else, not even Auntie. Eberhard, you too, understand? However, the secret could not be kept. I have to admit that the first person to violate the discipline was not someone else. I don't believe it, Josh Young said later. I saw that photo, I said. Josh Young didn't answer. She continued to take care of the little cockroaches, as if the job was more important than the stars. The cockroaches seemed to be bigger, squeezing one against another, twisting wildly at the mouth of the test tube, and Josh Young couldn't get them done no matter what. Threw the test tube on the table angrily. You know, those insects are very restless. I am familiar with them. They are very irritable. They are only like this when they encounter some danger. They always foresee disasters earlier than humans. She left the workbench and I saw that she was almost crying. She was still a child after all. Her hands were shaking, but she quickly hid them in her pockets. I said, "Are you scared?" She looked me in the face and said, "Aren't you?" "I'm scared. Now everyone knows about this, but no one wants to talk about it. This is a dangerous sign. We are all scared. Something is bound to happen. Something is bound to happen, and we don't know what it will be." She kept shaking. I would rather we were still deep in the dark matter cloud and never see the outside. I put my arm around her shoulders and said, "Don't be silly. You know, we've all been waiting for this day." That morning in the teaching hall, several little boys were playing a card game on the computer. This was supposed to be a very ordinary psychological training class. Baru, a half-grown boy, turned over 5 playing cards in a row, and the computer slammed them back. Another little boy laughed foolishly, so Baru threw the keyboard away, jumped up and pounced on him, punching him. The classroom was in chaos, and it took the pastor 10 minutes to drag them up and drag them to the detention room. This was unprecedented under my aunt's strict control. I couldn't help but look at Jiaxiang, who was sitting in the corner. Her face was extremely pale. She looked back at me, and the meaning in her eyes was clear. It was definitely not just this. I had always regarded Eberhard as a harmless, superfluous mass of overdeveloped organisms on board, and even he seemed to me a threat. That night he came right up to me and said, "Let's kill Spence." I was so shocked that I almost jumped up. "Are you crazy? Why did you kill Spence?" "I don't know," Eberhard said, looking flustered and embarrassed. "I just thought that Spence was the cause of all this, and if we get rid of him, maybe everything will be fine." I knew that Eberhard was a madman. Although he had always tried his best to maintain order on the spacecraft, his condition still frightened me. This was not a good sign. I saw a mad look in the eyes of several people, which was close to insanity. The blurred light spot in the photo seemed like an omen, lingering in my mind. A voice reminded me that I should do something, but I had no idea what to do. The mothership was trembling quietly and constantly, and the day for the Vanguard ship to change guard was approaching again. "There's nothing you can do," Spence said, and he wasn't being sarcastic. Jiaxiang and I found Spence in his bedroom, feeling guilty and puzzled by the messy consequences of his discovery. "Why did this happen?" he said. "I thought everyone would figure it out soon enough." "Understand what? Should we listen to you, or to Stone? Or should we still believe what Annie says?" I said angrily. The surveillance camera had of course been removed by Spence. "If you weren't so stupid, you would know that we would all be terrified." "Well, we should have a leader," he said, his face wrinkled in thought. "And you are the leader. You should come out and take charge of the situation." "You knew no one would listen to me," I said, angry and frustrated. "We are a mess here. Did you see what happened in the classroom this morning? Now Annie is losing control too." Spence suddenly shouted, "Because we lack team spirit. You should be able to see that we are all excluding each other. Look at Eberhard and Stone, and you and me, yes, you and me, and even Jiaxiang. We all have excellent genes, but we are too self-centered. Why have we never gathered together except for classes and that meeting? There is a game area in the bottom cabin. Why have we never played there together? Yes, I think of the rusty iron frame and the swings, and how even Hideki and I never played Skittles or cricket. It was a game that required 4 or 5 kids to play together, and we never played it. My aunt abandoned the game area, which is the most important activity for children to develop team spirit. She should know this. She's an education expert. She has an education program." Spence shouted angrily. "I have an idea about this," Jiaxiang said. "Aunt is undoubtedly loyal. She doesn't want this mission to fail. But she doesn't know herself. No one knows her, and no computer knows her. She only wants to succeed, so she must control the overall situation. The existence of the dark matter cloud is a terrible challenge to her. She can't control the surrounding environment, but she is powerless to modify the program, which will stimulate her desire to control everything more strongly. The existence of children is another threat to the mission." Jiaxiang smiled at us. "We are indeed very disobedient. If we unite as one, she will be even less able to maintain her dignity." "Maybe she didn't realize that closing the bottom hold was a perfect excuse," I said. "You have a point. Spence said, but I think maybe she wants to be a queen for life, the Dark King on high. He pointed upward, and I didn't have time to see his gesture clearly because the coming of darkness came without warning. As we were talking, the ceiling light in the cabin suddenly went out. The cabin was pitch black, pure darkness without a single glimmer of light. I had never understood how afraid I was of darkness. At that moment, my lips went numb and I could not scream. A hand reached out and held me tightly. It was Jiaxiang's hand. I calmed down and found that my hands were covered in cold sweat. I could not hear what Jiaxiang said in my ear. My ears were pounding, and it took me a while to realize that it was the sound of blood rushing to my temple. At this moment, 2 flashes of light stung my eyes. The emergency lighting system was on, but the light was weak and flickering, as if it would go out at any time. "Come on," Jiaxiang shouted. We rushed into the corridor and found that the hall was also dimly lit. Most places on the spacecraft could not even see a trace of light. My heart was pounding. Finally, from somewhere, a few dark shadows hurriedly crawled through the corridor. They were the spiders loyal to their duty, always tirelessly moving through the steel maze, searching for the places that went wrong. "Something's wrong," Spence said. "Yes, something must have happened," I said nervously. "We have to find out where it is." "We have to find out where it is," I said. Spence ran after the spiders as they entered a maintenance tunnel and disappeared into the darkness of the pipe. Spence leaned over and examined the markings on the pipe opening. "They seem to be running towards the bottom cabin," he said. The alarm suddenly stopped, and there was silence all around. The lights flickered on his face. After the noise just now, the silence seemed even more frightening. "The bottom deck?" I said, thinking of the oversized, cold black steel frames and the dead souls. "Somebody has to go check it out." I swallowed hard. "And somebody has to go find the priest." "Where is he?" "I mean, he should be here. He should be the one who handles this." "You look like you're about to cry. Are you okay?" Jiaxiang said. "Really?" I calmed down and tried hard to force a smile. "Okay." Jiaxiang looked at me worriedly. "I'll go find my aunt. Spence, you and Ayu go to the bottom cabin and be careful." "I don't understand. Why is it the lower cabin?" I said, standing at the lower cabin ladder leading to the darkness. The world below was as dark as the chaotic abyss at the beginning of the creation. "There's a weapons storage room next to the old cabin," said Spence. "Oh, Spence, please stop telling me bad news." I hesitated in front of the maze-like passage under the stairs, and Spence ran ahead and disappeared into the darkness. "Look out, Spence," I called under my breath. "What can you see?" Spence didn't answer. There was a muffled sound from the front, like the sound of something heavy falling. I cursed under my breath and walked into the passage. It was not as dark as I imagined. A small, dim emergency light flickered half brightly on the top of the cabin. I saw footprints in the dust, leading directly to the hatch of the weapons storage room. The door was opened. There was a strange smell of burning in the air. There was a small charred mass on the ground in front of the door. "Spence," I whispered, approaching the dark mass, which was the charred remains of a spider. An arm stretched out from the darkness and grabbed my arm, frightening me so much that I almost screamed. "Shh," a voice whispered in my ear. "Spence," I whispered. "What the heck is going on?" "Hush. He's just ahead, just a little while away." "Who's in front?" I said angrily. "I didn't see who it was," Spence said, "but someone took the guns and the MPB from the weapons bay." "MPB?" I asked angrily. There was nothing I understood here. Spence looked at me strangely. "It's a kind of explosive used for geological exploration and blasting." "Guns? Explosives?" I groaned. "What does this lunatic want?" "We have to stop him." "Follow me," Spence said briefly. He led me down a passage that I was vaguely familiar with. "There is a door here that leads directly to the garbage outlet, which is where dead bodies and non-recyclable materials are handled. Standing on this passage, you can see rows of huge engines on both sides. They are like the remaining columns in the ruins of ancient Egyptian temples, piercing the cabin roof that cannot be seen due to the darkness. If you stop, hold your breath and concentrate, you can hear all kinds of sounds. The children say that this is where the souls of the dead live." I followed Spence and continued walking forward until the end. In front of me was a door, black and heavy, with a blue-black control panel and pattern on it. This was the abandoned transition cabin. Be careful, he must be nearby. There is no other way here, I said. Have you been here? Spence looked at me curiously. A sense of bitterness welled up in my heart, and I tried the door, and as expected. It's all rusted, I said. He can't be in there. Spence didn't answer. He gasped and stared in the other direction. There's something there, he said. I looked back in despair, and a row of red, jumping numbers came into view. A person under the activated bomb was looking back in panic. Eberhard, it's you here. I shouted in surprise, hardly believing my eyes. Although he was already a madman, I didn't believe he would do anything to harm the spacecraft. Come here. Stay away from that thing, Spence shouted. Eberhard's face was filled with panic. Is that thing dangerous? Come on, I yelled. We have to get out of here. Can you get Spider, Spence? Eberhard took a few hesitant steps forward. Don't go over there. Do you want to fall? A familiar voice said from behind the shadow of the thick ribs. Stone, I should have known it was you. Spence shouted angrily. In Sherdong's hand was the defensive gun that had killed the Spider in front of the weapons bay. He stood up straight amid the seemingly eternal hum of the engine, a sneer on his lips, and the red numbers on the wall behind him jumped rapidly. We stared at each other with hostility. What are you doing here? I said later, surprised to find that my voice was both cool and calm. It is obvious that you are finished, he shouted viciously. He is coming and his power is unstoppable. He was chewing his fingernails again. He's nervous. He's catatonic. Can you tell? Spence whispered to me. What is catatonic disorder? I was so frightened by the long string of words that I almost blurted out Eberhard's catchphrase, Is it dangerous? Eberhard stood in the middle, almost at a loss, and said in a trembling voice, Am I safe like this? I am scared to death. Eberhard, you're dead if you stay there. Come here. Don't go there. Even your aunt can't save you, said Sherdong. I don't know. He looked pale, looked at me and Spence, then at Stone, and almost cried. Sherdong, what you are doing won't benefit anyone. I licked my dry lips. We have already sent someone to inform Auntie. Spence suddenly grabbed my arm. A girl's scream came from the upper deck in the distance, and it sounded faint because of the distance. It was Jiaxiang's voice. As if receiving a signal, Eberhard rolled his eyes, arched his back, and slammed his legs to the ground. Stone's gun suddenly turned towards Eberhard. This may be just a subconscious action, but at this moment, a bomb exploded at eyebrow height, followed by another one, and the wind rushed out from the broken hole of the air duct, knocking everyone to the ground. Fire! The cabin is on fire! Spence shouted desperately in my ear. I subconsciously thought that the bulkhead was not broken, otherwise we would all be dead. The cabin was filled with thick smoke. I couldn't see anything, and I was choked and coughed desperately. Get down, Spence yelled from behind. We have to go back and get the oxygen masks. Go get the oxygen mask, I thought, stumbling forward. Stone? I called, but I bumped into a metal pipe. Ahead, the fire was consuming the side bulkheads, and the huge shadows of the big engine columns, lit by the fire, were swaying angrily on the ceiling. There was a banging noise somewhere. I was not afraid of fire, I told myself. I was only afraid of the dark. The fire illuminated the dark hold. Several screaming little spiders arrived and ran around the room, and the automatic fire extinguishers on their backs began to spray white foam. I saw Stone, kneeling on the ground, with the gun in his hand dropped to the side. Then he got up and staggered towards the gun. No, Stone! I screamed and rushed forward. Stone grabbed the gun, turned it over, and swung it. There was a sharp pain behind my ear, and the world seemed to fall down in front of me. I groaned and looked up to see Stone pointing his gun triumphantly at me. What do you have to say now? He said, chewing his nails. Eberhard, I said. What? Sherdong asked blankly. A fat dark figure pounced on Stone, knocked him to the ground, and they started fighting. There was another explosion. The force of the impact made my ears ring. When I came to, I found myself sitting in a pile of white debris. Stone and Eberhard were gone. The smoke was thicker than before, and in it I could see flames. In the distance, the spider's fire extinguishers hissed. I coughed hard and reached out my hand to grope on the wall, looking for a fire extinguisher. My eyes and lungs burned, and I fell down in a daze. I was going to die, I thought. The temperature dropped. A pair of hands lifted me to my feet, and Spence pressed a mask over my face. "Did you find Stone?" I asked after I had caught my breath. "Let's forget about him for now. What do you think?" "How's Stone?" I asked stubbornly. "He's dead," Eberhard explained in horror, his face hidden behind the oxygen mask, black and white. "I didn't mean to do that. Oh my God. What will my aunt do to me now? I have never done anything wrong in my life. Under normal circumstances, I would have stuffed it into the garbage chute, but now, it seemed as if something very important had occupied my mind, and I couldn't remember it. I looked at the charred wall. This was really bad, a fire. I thought, why didn't my aunt react? She should have been furious. She should have sounded the sirens. She should have had the priest run around with a whip. Why? Jiaxiang. I woke up with a start, my body cold. Something's going to happen to her. Oh my God. It's terrible, and I fainted. Not long yet, Spence said. "Come on, let's go up." I rushed to the gangway, jumped up 4 steps at a time, ran to the middle platform, turned around, and suddenly found that the pastor was standing upright on the highest platform of the stairs. I gasped. A child was firmly held in its metal arms. It was Jiaxiang. She was about to suffocate. Although the priest does not have his own brain, it does not mean that he poses no threat to us. Even her aunt would not allow her to defy the educational procedures. She was her own prisoner. "She is crazy," Jiaxiang said. And now, the pastor started to speak, and I almost fainted again. His dark voice swept across the dark hall, and he read the distorted version of the Book of Revelation in a serious tone. A vision of divine revelation. A pale horse appeared in the cloud, and its name was Death. All living things on earth had a premonition of the coming of the end of the world. You see, this is a barred spiral galaxy. This is a bloody massacre of all nations and peoples. The vines were thrown into the great mill of God's wrath, and the grapes were crushed. The blood flowed from the mill and flowed directly to the horse's bridle for a full 1,600 stadia. What you see is PSR 0531 plus 21, with a pulse period of 33 milliseconds. Whoever bows down to the beast and his image will drink the wine of God's wrath and will be burned in fire and sulfur before the holy angels and the Lamb. They will have no rest day or night. 33 milliseconds. The hall was silent, and we all looked at the crazy priest and the crazy aunt. I was so scared that my legs were shaking. This was exactly what Stone said. The priest's huge body was spinning around in the hall, his electric whip flashing like a flash of lightning wrapped around the edge of a dark cloud. "Spence," I whispered, "where's Stone's gun? Give it to me. We can't beat him. He is controlled by his aunt." "Bullshit," I cursed. "Can't you see that it's Jiaxiang?" I snatched the pistol from Spence's arms and aimed at the pastor. I hesitated for a moment. Jiaxiang's painful face flashed before my eyes. I cursed myself and fired. Jiaxiang touched her throat. "I'm fine," she said in shock. "I don't know. He grabbed me all of a sudden. This guy must be crazy. Maybe someone changed his program," Spence said. We couldn't help but look at each other. Zhulong. We ran together up the gangway leading to the upper deck, and the dark hall swayed beneath our feet. I reached for the DNA door lock, but was slammed back. "What's going on?" I shouted in horror. Spence reached for it and was also slammed. "It's the electricity," Spence yelled. "Stone has changed the lock program, but we must go in. If we don't correct the procedure, the chaos will never stop." I said desperately. "Let me try." Spence smiled slyly. "You forget that I am the best locksmith here." "No way, you've never succeeded." "It's not the skills that are lacking." In the darkness, I spotted Spence running down the gangway. "Wait for me." I turned my anger to Eberhard, who had been cowering behind us. "Look at what you and Stone have done. Can't you just find a place to lock yourself up, you big jerk who only knows how to make trouble with your belly sticking out?" "I don't know. It wasn't me," Eberhard said dejectedly. "Let's argue later, okay?" Jiaxiang said. Just now Spence said that there were 4 bombs missing from the bottom cabin. Maybe I was a little scared, but I only remember 3 explosions down there. Broke out on my face. You mean there's a bomb out there? Darn it. Eberhard, I yelled. Where is it? Bomb, what bomb? Eberhard shouted in panic, his fat face trembling violently, his eyes filled with tears. I didn't touch it. Okay, maybe you didn't touch it, I said angrily, but where did Stone put it? Stone? Eberhard said. It couldn't have been him. I was with him the whole time. What do you mean, it's not him? I asked in surprise. But you know there are only a few of us who can go in here, and you have been with him all the time? After the lights went out. I swear, I was so scared. Eberhard sobbed pitifully. I felt it was very dangerous. Then we went downstairs together. I didn't see when he took the gun, otherwise I would have stopped him. Your little eyes can only see your nose. I shouted angrily, if it wasn't Stone, who else could have modified Annie's program? On the gangway, and Spence climbed up panting, holding a large and heavy black box in his hands. The priest's energy cell, Spence explained, is controlled by a microcomputer. If the energy of the electronic pulse is high enough, it can fuse the computer chip. Electronic pulse? Where can you get an electronic pulsar now? I demanded. What's the matter? Spence said. It must be in your pocket. Give me the vibrator. The air was filled with the smell of burning metal. We stepped through the threshold and were greeted by the same quietly trembling star pictures. But something was different. The small grids on the wall of the huge crystal ball no longer glowed, and the mysterious sparks that once flickered and jumped in those small grids were silent. The candle dragon was shrouded in a breath of death. Auntie is dead. This is a spaceship without Annie. We were all a little confused. Now, I said. A curtain covered my eyes and I hesitated. Bomb. Jiaxiang reminded me. Yes, the bomb. I said. We have to find it first. Spence, what do you think? I think. Spence blinked. We can connect to my aunt's monitor, and then, we'll see what to do. I watched him in a daze, as he lay on the calculation table and operated it skillfully. A dusty copper nameplate on the side of the table caught my attention. My fingers slid across the cold metal and I read, Captain's room. So, is this not the center of Auntie, but the human realm? I guessed doubtfully. The intercom, Spence called out. There's a response from the intercom. Several spiders were crawling around in the transition hatch, and my heart trembled a few times. It seemed like a scene I had experienced in the past. What's the matter? I asked. Jiaxiang turned around and saw me. The line is damaged. We can't open it. I leaned over to the observation window and looked inside. The outer valve of the transition cabin was open to the outside, and the cabin was empty. The bright light suddenly stopped at the hatch, and there was surging darkness outside. What would happen if it exploded? We're going to get off course. We're just riding the wave of inertia. Spence said. Not exactly. I interrupted with some complacency. Sending the Vanguard forward will consume some power, and we all going to die. What? I said. This bomb is enough to destroy the transition cabin. Although we can isolate this area, the airflow rushing out of the breach will change the course of the spacecraft, even if it's just a little bit, and we will leave the area shielded by the Pioneer ship. At that time, there will be a bang, Hideki said. The Vanguard is coming back. I thought in panic. So what, can we change its program? There is no time. There is no calculation program. What to do? Spence looked into the transition cabin. We have 15 minutes. I started sweating again. What do you mean? Spence, I'm going to go crazy if you do that again. Detonation in 15 minutes, Spence said. I think that's what the surveillance footage is telling us. Someone must get out. Jiaxiang turned to look at me, and I knew my face must have turned pale. Stop arguing, I said, Hideki's shadow passing before my eyes. I'm the captain, and I'm the only one trained to go out of the cabin. Spence, find a way to seal off the bottom cabin and don't let the little guys down. And I paused and added, get Jiaxiang out of here, too. Jiaxiang said, you know I won't leave. I want to stay. You're a fool, I said. Spence, come and help me first. How did you get out? He looked at me in confusion as I pulled the space suit out of the closet. I was back in the endless darkness, and the space suit was much heavier than I remembered. How much time had passed? It took us too long to open the door of the long-disrepaired transition module. There was no way back now. The intercom was crackling, and Spence couldn't find the communication frequency, which was previously controlled by my aunt. I tried to stick to the wall and climb up. The terrible darkness was surging at my feet, my waist, and my ears. The light from the transition hatch in the distance was like a warm window calling the lost people in the thick darkness. I slowly approached it. Just then, someone greeted me cheerfully from above my head. I looked up. Hideki's white figure was floating on the rooftop, looking down at me. No, of course it wasn't Hideki. Hideki was dead. A spark flashed on the antenna support. I saw his face through the dark mask. This isn't true, I said, shaking my head. But he was still there. Hideki was still there. Oh my God, I said. Did you do all this, Hideki? Not Stone. But you? Did you do all this? A flash of light lit up my mind. The lock of Zhulong had been filled with Hideki's DNA code. We all forgot that in addition to Au, Stone, Eberhard, and Spence, there was another person who could enter and leave Zhulong freely, just like he belonged to it 7 years ago. It was he who changed Annie's program, opened the weapons bay, and installed the MPB. He arranged all this very well, and only he could do it so well. And we didn't even think about it. Xiao Xiushu seemed not to see me. His eyes were exactly the same as Shi Dong's in the cabin, sensitive, confused, and meaningless. We were silent on the top of the cabin. My mind was in a mess, and I didn't know what to do. The trouble was that I had to do something. The opportunity was fleeting. This situation forced you to use your brain and think. Thinking is a valuable thing. It can gather information and deduce measures and results step by step. But I thought painfully I can't think. I can't think like Hideki. I can't think like Spence. I am a useless captain. What should I do now? You should go back. I was surprised when he suddenly spoke. You should go back, he said, still not looking at me. This place doesn't belong to you. I licked my lips, a little undecided. Come back with me, Hideki. Don't do it again. It's okay. We all want you to come back. Everything will be fine. I don't care. The confidence and indifference in his voice made me shudder. You all want me to go back? No, it's you who want me to go back, and you never knew what you wanted me to do. Now I know what to do. This outside world belongs to me, mine. So far, his words still had a certain logic, but I detected an impatient and slightly authoritarian tone. I've done a lot of things wrong, I said bitterly, but everything will be fine. We all need to change. Come back with me. No, no. I've had enough of this, he cried suddenly, raising his voice. I know what to do. I don't want judgment. I'm better than you. I'm always better than you. I'm always right, and I should be your leader. You always right, I repeated in a low voice. He was as sensitive as Hideki, I thought sadly, and he was always right. What should I do? Should I give in? His body relaxed. You believe in dark matter, he smiled childishly. I discovered dark matter. I have been searching for it, and now I am discovering the secrets of the universe. I.e., if you think about it carefully, you will find that physics is taking us to the realm of God. Whether it is towards a larger or smaller direction, it will reach a place that we cannot grasp. He will not let us touch the deepest secrets of the universe, and we should not go to see him. Is this the reason why you resisted going out? I couldn't help but think of the bomb still stuck in the transition cabin. You were afraid to face the truth, so you killed my aunt. You also want to change the course. Do you know that this will kill all of us? Don't argue with me, he said angrily again. I paused. He would not tolerate anyone pointing out his mistakes. No one wants to argue. Let's go back first, shall we? No, he cried, pulling something from his waist. I don't like going back. I took a step back involuntarily. It was a pistol, exactly the same as the one in Stone's hand. I understood why he didn't want to go back. Here he was strong and powerful. Are you afraid too, Captain? He chuckled, holding the gun majestically. It's always dark out here, and you're afraid of the dark, aren't you? Yes, we are all scared. But everything will change if we can. I searched for the words in my mind. Control ourselves. He stepped back a few steps and leaned against the thick catapult rack at the bow. His face was hidden in the shadow behind the mask. For a moment, he looked like a helpless child. I don't want to go back. I don't want to. I can feel the stars outside. He will come. At that time, there is no need to be afraid anymore. Give me the gun, I pleaded, taking a step forward. Let's go back. Let's go back. No. He suddenly screamed in annoyance. Don't come near me. I know. I know everything. Aunt has gone crazy, and if I don't destroy her, she will kill me. You have been lying to me. You have been lying to me. He waved the gun, pointing the muzzle directly at the tip of my nose. No time, I thought painfully. At this time, I saw a ball of fire behind him getting bigger. It was the pioneer ship that had overcome all difficulties and hardships and was returning. Look, Star, I cried. He comes. Pioneer 1 approached, and the sparks from the collision of charged particles illuminated his face. He dropped his arms and looked back blankly. Now, here he is, he said. I jumped up and lunged forward. He had been doing well up until this point, but he had not received formal EVA training and could not have known the correct way to tie the safety line, just a gentle tug. Maybe I was just imagining it, but I heard a childish voice in my headphones whisper, "No." I lowered my head to avoid the dazzling flames. There was a lot of noise in the headset, but suddenly Spence's voice overwhelmed the noise, and he finally found the right frequency. Hey, boss, you have to be careful. We found that one of the extravehicular spacesuits is missing. Maybe someone is outside. It doesn't matter anymore, I said, slowly moving away from the top of the ship, where Vanguard 1 was shaking the bow rail violently. Boss, report your position. We need to hurry. Transit 1, closing the outer hatch, I reported. Time passed in a flash. I thought I would panic, but I was surprisingly calm. Help me, Hideki, I said silently in my heart. You will want me to succeed. The locking screws behind me collided with each other, and the clean air poured into the cabin like a swirling spring. Oh my God, he said. What's the matter? Look to your upper left, Spence said. I saw the bomb. It was stuck to the lower edge of the door, like an unclean stain. A red display flashed 314, and it was shrinking. It took me a moment to realize what was happening. 3 more minutes, I thought. More than enough. Open the door. Open the door, Spence yelled in his ear. Let Spider handle the bomb. Shut up, I said, took off my gloves, squatted down and groped along the edge of the door. I felt slow and unresponsive, just like the feeling after taking too much dopamine. The black thing stuck on the door was right in front of me, and the numbers were jumping rapidly. Finally found it. I pried open the circuit cover along the edge. Facing the densely packed wires inside, I almost gave up. Can you see, Spence? Tell me what to do. Listen, you have to make sure the AA/95 line is still valid. Connect K62. A suitable line. Spence's words were interrupted by another noise. Jerk. I was losing control. It had to be that darn radiation shield from the Vanguard ship. I poked around in the repair panel without any confidence. Maybe it's not too late. I seem to have learned this circuit diagram before. I vaguely remember it from a maintenance class a long time ago. What Hideki said, in an emergency. A good line, Spence said. I started trying the wires one by one. The careful Hideki used a laser to melt all the wires together, like a colorful Miro painting. But just open the door, just open the door. Hurry up, Spence chirped into his earpiece. 1 minute, 1 minute. Okay, I've connected it. Let Andy open the door. The door stood still as if it were made of cast iron. Head, Spence cried. It's funny, I thought, after all I've done, that I'm stopped by this darn door. I cursed fiercely and kicked the door. The door swung open, and Spence and a swarm of spiders rushed in with blinding light. It's over, I said. There was screaming in the headphones. I took off my helmet and threw it aside, staggering into the spacecraft, and a hand reached out to steady me. Silly, you shouldn't stay here. I took a deep breath and no longer had the energy to be angry. Her eyes were filled with tears and smiles. I pushed the heavy copper door shut, shutting out Spence, who was chattering along with me, and shutting out all the noise, bustle, and light. Only the star-shaped slides on the wall were dimly glowing. They're in silence. Then I turned and stared at the little brass plaque on the console. I don't understand. Why him? I whispered. I don't know why him. He should be a good crewman. I tried to think about it, but the bomb. No need to explain. Joshung interrupted me. That's not Shoshu anymore. Don't you understand what I did? I said beggingly. I understand, Joshung said. We will all understand. I was silent for a while, then looked up and said, there will be another little Shoshu, right? She looked a little surprised, staring into my eyes, and slowly a smile appeared on her lips. Yes, she replied. Until then, you will be our captain. It's not my fault, I said. No, it's not. Joshung reached out and hugged me. No one is wrong. The fault is this cursed, crazy dark space. And now it's all over. It's all over, I said, lowering my head in the darkness to search for Kashang's lips. I saw her dark eyes slowly open, filled with joy, wonder, desire, and awe. I turned around and looked outside. The light of the stars shone on us through the observation window. The light source was far away, but clearly visible. The light was a pale bluish white, weak and steady. It is a distant, forgotten world.